Dear chess lovers, today I will show you a very instructive game from chess history. It's a chess classic that everyone should know. Botvinnik, Alekhine, 1938 AVRO tournament, folks. One of the three games that those great world champions played against each other. Botvinnik was only 27 years old in that game, and Alekhine was already a world champion. Later, after the tournament, Alekhine told the journalist that this was the only game that he felt outplayed in the entire tournament. And what a feat that is to be able to outplay a world champion as Alekhine. We will discuss middle game ideas, pawn structures, endgame technique, exchanges. This game has everything, folks. Please take a stock, get ready to be actively engaged with the material. I will stop at the right moments and I will ask you to stop the video and guess Botvinnik's ideas. We'll also engage in evaluation in this episode, folks. I will ask you, for example, to take a stock and evaluate certain positions and what are you seeing and how do you judge a chess position. Okay, let's begin the game, folks. Botvinnik with the white pieces play knight f3, Alekhine plays d5, and now we basically transpose into queen's gambit declined. Knight c3, and Alekhine goes for early c5, signifying Tarrasch or semi-Tarrasch structures. Botvinnik take on d5, and Alekhine takes back with a knight. And already here comes an interesting decision. Botvinnik chooses to play e3 in the actual game, folks. If he went for e4, then the game would transpose to well-known semi-Tarrasch pawn structure with the move bishop b4. White has the ideal pawn center, but black has the majority on the queen side. 2 versus 1, very interesting imbalance, and the game would end up in this very typical middle game after takes and castle short. There are many games that was played here. Black is solid, although white has chances on the king side also later on in the structure. Okay, very interesting. But Botvinnik played the move e3. Now we will transpose into an IQP pawn structure. Bishop c4 puts pressure on d5, and after takes, of course, Botvinnik takes back with the pawn, and we see an isolated queen's pawn. Botvinnik was a great practitioner of IQPs, folks. He was one of the first players, strong players, that voluntarily took those structures. Russian school of chess, of course, right? Soviet school of chess, that basically preaches for activity and dynamic factors over, this dogmatic teachings of Steinitz, more or less. Yeah, so the Chigorin-Steinitz match was the first one to sort of highlight the importance of piece activity for those structural considerations. E takes d4, very typical. Botvinnik won so many games in those structures, and the game already transposes to a very interesting middle game position. You see, after rook e1, we end up in a very typical IQP formation. Black has a better pawn structure, but middle game was created before the end game, as Tarrasch used to say. Okay, white piece activity is definitely visible in this position. White can also at any moment take on d5 and create the symmetrical pawn formation. We are coming there soon, guys. Already here, Alekhine makes an inaccurate move, folks. At those times, of course, the opening theory around this position wasn't fully matured yet, and he's making a very instructive inaccuracy with the move v6, and it takes Botvinnik to punish this move, actually, folks. So taking on c3 directly might be better if the idea is to play b6, because this way the bishop's diagonal will be opened up. Okay, so it will be probably preferable for black to do it this way, although later practice show us that white is a very strong move h4 in its middle games, highlighting knight g5 ideas to put pressure on the king side and force a concession. And if black takes the pawn, then it gets really dangerous, folks. Look at this. Rook h3, bishop h7, all of our pieces are shooting on the king side. Beautiful pawn center, and it's really difficult for black to defend this position. There are some very classical games from Razuaev, if I'm not wrong, with white pieces that shows us that white is so much more better in this position, and black is facing enormous difficulties in those structures. Okay, so that's understandable that Alekhine didn't go for this setup, and he chose the move b6. And here comes my first question. Please stop the video and tell me how white played in this position, folks. You're a great player if you found Botvinnik's move knight takes d5, because by taking that knight, he's creating a symmetrical pawn formation, but see what he's doing. First of all, he's activating his rook. Second of all, after bishop b5, white is gaining one full tempo on that knight, and in the symmetrical pawn formations, tempo is very important. Initiative is very important. White is counting on his piece activity in this structure on claiming an advantage, basically, right? So also once knight moves, you'll have knight e5 ideas and so on. And also, yeah, the bishop's diagonal has been shut down after the pawn transformation, so that bishop will never become a dangerous piece again. And please notice that this b6 move is hurting black because of this loose knight on c6, but also later on, right, because that knight is loose, white will take over the c file. So from here, the strategy is crystal clear actually for white. And you see how Botvinnik will outplay the world champion from the symmetrical pawn formation. It's actually quite amazing how he outplays great Alekhine from these positions. You see, queen a4 is a very logical move, putting pressure on that knight, putting pressure on the queen side in general, and getting ready to connect his rooks. Knight b8 was chosen. It's a sad necessity, folks, because if you play the move rook c8, then you allow bishop f4, and you have problems, you see? Like, what is your next move? I don't see it. Rook c1 is coming, and pressure is intensified on that knight. Just take a stock. In this symmetrical pawn formation, white has amazingly active pieces. Every single piece will be doing amazing jobs here, but look at black pieces. They are restrained, and that explains the entire advantage. Entire advantage is about piece activity and coordination for white in this position. So after queen a4, sad move, knight b8 was chosen by Alekhine, but Botvinnik keeps on developing, right? Again, fluid development, every single piece is connected. Takes, sorry, after bishop takes, queen takes, he goes a6 in this position just to chase the queen away, but this also creates one more target on b6, namely the b6 square itself will become weak later on, okay? Well, bishop d6 was chosen in the actual game, folks, and we see one more trade. Botvinnik doesn't shy from piece trades because he knows after that bishop disappears, c7 and e7 points have become loose, and white will use that to infiltrate to the 7th rank later on. Again, take a stock, evaluation question. If the same position would be given with a pawn on b7, this will be a whole different scenario, but because that pawn is already on b6, folks, can you please see it? This b6 pawn move is hurting black really a lot in this particular position. That's sometimes what the entire evaluation depends on. A single nuance. The pawn being on b6 instead of b7, that makes a huge difference. Because if the pawn was on b7, folks, then knight c6 would be a very, very secure square for that knight. Then black will be solving their developmental problems, and you will not even let white invade the 7th rank on the c file. So yes, in some sense, this early b6 move is hurting black in this position. Amazing, right? Rook c1, and already here we see white's rooks are much better placed than their black counterparts. Rook a7 needs to defend the 7th rank, but Botvinnik plays the move queen c2, and you see the effect of white's heavy pieces. Again, you see the effect of piece activity in explaining the advantage of white in this position, in this symmetrical pawn formation. Well, rook e7 was chosen because this rook cannot move, right? There is no meaningful square for the rook. The knight cannot really move because then you allow some queen c6 ideas. Also, like knight d7 comes to mind, but you see, queen c6 is coming, and this is also quite a bad position for black. This pawn is weak, this pawn is weak, this pawn is also potentially weak, rook e7s are coming, knight e5's ideas are there. It's just a very, very bad endgame for black in this position, right? If they go f6 in this position, folks, then some queen f5 ideas are in the air, followed by rook e6 potentially. Again, eyeing the weak pawn on d5. Black has no easy way out. That's why Alekhine tried rook e7 in this position, folks. But Botvinnik doesn't mind piece trades because he knows he has organic weaknesses, like on c7. And can you tell me the next move, folks? Yes, I sort of gave it away. He simply offers one more piece trade, namely the queen trade. Can you please explain, using your own words, the strength of this move, queen c7, folks? What is he aiming for this with this exchange of the queens? Well, folks, it's as simple as that, right? He's exchanging black's main defender and invading the 7th rank with the rook. Now the 7th rank invasion took place. Please compare the piece activity difference. Botvinnik is counting on the fact that he will have enough to win this endgame. And now we are transitioning into one of the most instructive chess endgames out there. We'll see how Botvinnik will outplay Alekhine. F6 is a very good move. Burying that knight, let's say, and also offering a rook trade later with the move rook f7. Alekhine starts to defend really nicely in his position. And we'll take a Botvinnik to convert this. King f1. He wants to activate the king. If you chase after random pawns, that will be a mistake. Can you tell me black's next move, folks? Yes, black should ditch the pawn and activate the rook instead. I created a chessable course about this. The value of pawns, right? This pawn on b6 is not important. Piece activity is more important. The drawback of rook b7 is white is removing their rook from the open file. And the black rook should say thank you so much for giving me the open file, correct? And this will not be good because after b5, black definitely is enough, right? They've taken over the c file basically. So care is always required. White is keeping control. White's goal in his entire endgame is to keep domination. Dominated knight, dominated rook, and white wants to keep things as such. Rook f7. Do you exchange the rooks or do you keep them on the board? You're a great player if you say you want to keep them on the board because you have a so much more active rook than the rook on f7. So first he checks and here he goes rook c3. He's keeping the rook on c3. It's a very flexible square and black's problems remain. This knight on b8, focus that, is a terrible piece, folks. It cannot go to c6 to hit the pawn. And if he goes to d7, that knight will always be buried by the pawn on d4. Has no future whatsoever. He tries g5. It's actually a very interesting idea because he wants to drive the knight with the move g4, also not allowing moves like h4 for white to gain more space on the king side, right? He's basically like, yeah, basically just gaining more space on the king side with this push g5. He wants to defend this way, okay? Knight e1. It's a very interesting move from Botvinnik. This knight had no business on f3, right? It's completely restrained in this formation. So he simply goes back to e1. What can be the point of this move, folks? Can you please explain this move to me? What does he want to achieve with the move knight e1? Folks, very simple idea. He wants to go knight d3 and maybe knight b4 at some point, right? That knight will find great activity later on. h5 was chosen by Alekhine, and here comes one of the most interesting moves in this endgame. He wants to gain this f4 outpost for his knight, folks. He also wants to limit black's pawn avalanche on the king side. So he's finding a beautiful move that wants to create a target on the king side, but also wants to activate his knight on that side of the board. Can you guess Alekhine's beautiful move? Yes, folks, he plays h4. And what a beautiful move this is. He wants to basically, the first point is this: if you take my pawn, then knight f3, and now I will take on h4 with a beautiful structure, followed by knight f5, domination. You cannot take my pawn. If you go to g4, then can you see what weakness you're giving to white? Now f4 is becoming an outpost, and the knight is going there in 2 moves with full domination for white again, right? So if you don't take my pawn, then at some point I will take on g5 and I will gain the e5 square for my pieces. It's an incredibly powerful pawn move, folks. h4, multi-purpose. He plays knight d7. Again, if you play the move king f7, by the way, then this was the point, right? Just takes, followed by knight f3. And you see, the knight is becoming a giant again on that outpost on e5. You see how he connects his pawn play to piece activity? h4 creates weaknesses by force on the king side. It's a beautiful move. Knight d7 was chosen. Botvinnik first improves the rook, and only here he goes to f3 with the knight. He doesn't take directly because right now he says, well, after g4, the knight cannot go to e5 directly in its position, right? So he waits. He waits. He plays the move knight f3. He probes, right? He says, please give me a weakness. Otherwise, I will take twice on g5 in this position. So induces the move g4 and just goes back. It's a pendulum mechanism. It's one of the most beautiful pendulum ideas for white, right? Knight, again, just first went to f3 to probe a weakness, and just goes back to e1 because now it says, thank you so much for giving me the f4 outpost. Can you see the nuance? Can you see the strategic depth in all these back and forth ideas, folks? I hope I'm making it more instructive for you so you can understand the true strength of these moves. Well, f4 is a must because otherwise the knight's coming to f4 itself. So Alekhine plays the move f4. Do you think white should win a pawn like this? Takes, and takes. Is that even winning a pawn? No, because if you go for that, folks, first of all, you're exchanging your good knight for the bad knight, but also you're activating the enemy rook. You cannot do it right now. So instead of taking on f4, folks, Botvinnik chooses another strong move, a positional move that stops this pawn on its rails and creates a weakness on f4. Can you tell me the move, folks? Yes, another very multi-purpose move. f3 freezes the weakness on f4, but also stops black from pushing f3 themselves, yeah, gaining more space on the king's side. So that's a beautiful move. By the way, knight b4 was a winning idea as well, right? Hitting those targets will be, let's say, more forcing way for white to play this position. I guess the point is this, right? The point must be this, that I can take on a6 in this position. But Botvinnik doesn't want to deal with this endgame either. He freezes the pawn directly and he says, you have no counterplay left. Indeed, if you look at the pawn structure, weakness on h5, weakness on f4, weakness on d5, potential weakness on b6 and even a6. Black structure is full of holes and weaknesses, and white's pieces are so much better than their black counterparts. Again, an evaluation exercise. Please take a stock and try to evaluate this position. It's a symmetrical pawn structure, equal material. Why is white almost having a winning advantage? Just take a stock and try to understand these factors, folks. This will improve your strategic understanding, because without evaluation, right, calculation is useless. So you have to have some sort of template, some sort of end states that you know their evaluation, desirable states that you want to steer the game towards, right? So that's what you're doing right now by staring at its position and taking a stock and evaluate it properly. a5 was tried to stop knight b4, but Alekhine says, I'm not in a hurry. I have all the time in the world to improve my position. Rook c6, king e7. And here he goes king f2, right? White is not in a hurry. White can write Botvinnik with the king, initials with his king, and black still cannot do anything to him in this position. White is fully in charge, because if you look at the black pieces, they are all tied down, right? That's what happens. This knight is tied down on b6, and this rook is tied down on f4. Perfect tied down position and perfect activity for white. We want our pieces to hit weaknesses in chess. Just look at the white pieces. This knight hits the weak pawn on f4. This rook hits the weak pawn on b6. That's the basic lesson of positional chess. This example can teach you tremendous value when it comes to how to play good positional chess. You want to activate your pieces by eyeing those weaknesses in the board, because if you hit those weaknesses, the enemy pieces must go passive, right? It's a perfect evaluation exercise. Rook f5, and you see, perfect passivity and perfect activity. This rook can be like the worst rook I ever seen. Surely Alekhine has never played with a more terrible rook in his entire chess career. I never seen him playing with a worse rook than this. This rook's only job is to defend 3 weak pawns, and rooks hate doing that. This is like, please don't try it at home kind of a position for black, right? Please avoid this with black, folks. Rooks are not designed for this. Rooks are designed to attack those targets. Botvinnik plays b3. I'm not in a hurry, right? Do not hurry principle. Black is sort of in a zugzwang, by the way. If you pay close attention, has no squares left. The king cannot improve. The knight cannot really improve because of this. The rook cannot move, almost in full zugzwang. So that's why he plays king d8. The king has to drop back. King e2. Botvinnik keeps on waiting. Then he plays knight b8. Comes my question. Do you think white should grab the pawn on b6, or should white play the move rook g6? Please choose between these two options, folks. You're a great player if you play the move rook g6. You should not take that pawn, folks, because if you take that pawn, you allow king c7 followed by knight c6. That terrible knight is becoming a good piece, also hitting your weakness on d4. Can you see how he keeps control? Can you see how he says no to an extra pawn for not giving activity to the enemy pieces? That's the secret sauce of converting a winning advantage in chess. And that's how those great prophylactic champions play chess. Rook g6 because he knows he's fully in charge. There is no knight c6. The king is terrible and he can play rook g5 at any moment. King c7 was chosen and here he plays knight e5 because he doesn't want to allow the move knight c6. Prophylaxis all the way to the end, guys. This is such a beautiful game. Knight a6 wants to go to b4, but that square is not dangerous at all for us anyways. And here Botvinnik played the move rook g7 check. Rook g5 was winning. Congratulations if you came up with the move. Yes, I'm trading my good rook for your bad rook, but if you take my rook, then this pass pawn is unstoppable, yeah? Push them, baby, as they say, and we make a queen on the next turn. The game is over. So rook g5 is a beautiful move. Congratulations if you came up with that. Rook g7 check. Botvinnik wants to enjoy the position. Knight c6, another great move, hinting at knight e7 fork, but also fighting against the move knight b4. Rook f6. Finally, white is grabbing a pawn. Eventually, white grabbed the pawn. This knight is still dominating that knight on a6, by the way, also hitting here and there. After rook d6, do you take on f4, folks, or do you play rook g5? Please, two choices. Stop the video and judge for yourself. You're a great player if you came up with the move rook g5. Full control, keeping that knight, looking at this pawn on h5, and not giving any activity to black. Because if you took the pawn, you allow this, and that rook is now becoming a very active piece, also collecting 2 pawns in the process. This is not great for white in this position. But rook g5 keeps full control. This game is totally about control, right? After knight b4, he's offering a knight trade, and here Botvinnik accepts because he sees that this rook endgame is completely winning for white. And he starts with taking that pawn. After rook c6, he doesn't take the pawn on d4, folks, because it's completely winning for white. After this rook is not dangerous. So Alekhine tries rook c6, and here full control until the very end. One more pawn is gone. He gives up the h4 pawn and activates the king to d3. It's coming to e4, and black resigned in his position. He saw it all because he's down 2 pawns, and this pawn is also be lost very, very soon. Great pieces for white, even in the final position. This game is one of the most instructive games in chess history. Alekhine said it was only this game that he was outplayed, and the outplaying person was only 27-year-old guy from Soviet Union named Mikhail Botvinnik. After the World War, after 8 years from this game, he became the world champion, right? Or 10 years after this game, he became the world champion, Botvinnik, at the age of 37. But he was still a young person at this tournament. He finished in the middle of the table when the tournament ended. The tournament was won by Paul Keres and Ruben Fine. It was a very strong tournament. Capablanca was also there. He was old and sick. Alekhine was there. Keres, Botvinnik. It was a great, very strong tournament that was held in several different cities in the Netherlands. But this game really left an impression on Alekhine, but also in chess history. If you go back to this key position, b6 is inaccuracy, and Botvinnik punished it amazingly, basically. It just shows us, again, just basic lessons. Symmetrical structures are not equal. In symmetrical pawn structures, initiative, momentum, time advantage becomes huge, right? See how white's pieces were much more active than black counterparts. So it was white who was taking the initiative, who was giving the first threats and dictating the entire game. For example, in a symmetrical pawn structure, white was dictating this game by offering the queen trade, queen c7, right? That's what the advantage is about. Your good pieces is everything in a position like that. Now it's white who is taking the 7th rank in a symmetrical formation with limited material. White's advantage persisted, and black had a very, very daunting task in defending this position. White doesn't exchange the last pair of rooks because they're playing with a much more active rook. And here comes the interesting phase, the pendulum, back and forth. Knight e1, h4, amazingly strong move h4 to probe weaknesses, basically, to probe weaknesses, going back to f3, going back to e1. I mean, what's this? Knight f3, knight e1, knight f3, knight e1. Why did you do all this? Because of the f4 square, because of the specific weakness on f4, and then he took it from there. F3 is a beautiful move to freeze and fix a weakness on F4, and then we achieved one of the most amazing instructive positions in chess history, that black was playing with the most terrible rook in the world, right? And even until the very end, right? How he was refusing to grab a free pawn on b6 because that would give black counterplay with knight c6 to follow, right? How he was choosing to keep full control after the move rook g6. It's such an instructive chess classic, folks. Even here, right? Prophylaxis. He's not allowing knight c6. He wants to dominate. That's also a domination game. Domination game for white. Like zero counterplay was given at any moment to black. And Alekhine, a monstrous person with initiative, with piece activity, could never have a chance at a single moment to activate his pieces, right? None of his pieces were active for a single moment in the entire game. It's very unlikely for a world champion like Alexander Alekhine to have. So I'm sure he got the right lessons from this game, that he will not repeat that move b6. And yet, right, IQP positions are giving white really good chances in those structures. There are so many model games around here with some h4 and pawn sacrifices and so on. And Botvinnik was one of the first, players really, to show the strength of the IQP structures, especially for white in those positions. And he was really, really willing to take those positions with the white pieces. It also connects somehow, right, these IQP structures on the value of piece activity over material and structure. That's what we are preaching, especially after the AlphaZero revolution, that showed us that, yeah, king safety and piece activity are more important than structural concerns. Botvinnik was a visionary because he was going beyond Steinhatz's, let's say, dogmatic views about not pushing pawns at all to create weaknesses and, dogmatic views against the IQPs and so on. He was accepting those positions willingly to show the strength of middle game piece play and dynamical compensation for such weaknesses, such as the pawn on d4. It's so visible that in these positions, giving white so much space, also like great piece activity potential, bishop d3s and so on, even h4, h5s, as I show you in those structures, they are quite relevant still in our time, right? Those middle game positions giving white so much activity in compensation for, let's say, a weakness on c3 and so on, right? Fascinating positions to look at. And finally, what are your lessons that you've taken from this instructive chess classic? Do you like to take IQP positions yourself, or do you like to play against the IQP? What are your experiences personally as a chess player? Did you enjoy this game? What are your main takeaways? Please write to me on YouTube and I will give you feedback, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson, and I will catch you on the next episode on instructive chess classics. Bye-bye.